So today we're going to basically do a big news update for Valorant. There was different parts of news that came out about different things, and I thought we'd just lump it all into one video. But let's start off with the idea that Valorant might be coming to consoles. But before we do that, today's video is being sponsored by the Valorant Tracker app, which can give you some really useful advice in and out of the game. For instance, I had no idea this Cyphercam existed until the app told me about it. But then a few rounds later, look at me go. Also take a look at this nice clean headshot as well. But it can tell you a lot more about how you play as well. Detailed stats about maps, guns, and agents are waiting for you. For instance, did you know I'm a certified good person? Chamber and Reyna, 0 hours played. And you can go into the link in the description or the pinned comment to download it today. Thanks for Valorant Tracker for sponsoring the video. And this kind of idea came about because here is a job listing for a games design manager, console, Valorant. Pretty clear what the intention is there. Obviously, if Riot are only just hiring these people right now and they haven't even hired them yet, it's probably still going to be some way away. I would imagine, still quite a few years away probably, if, those people are only just being hired right now. So this is still for the distant future. Don't expect this, coming anytime soon, but it does seem like there is a decent possibility that Valorant might come to consoles in that distant future. And so with that in mind, would Valorant work on a console? Would it make sense to play on consoles? And for me, actually, yeah, right? When you consider you've got the 4 abilities, you need to be able to aim, you need to be able to shoot, you need to be able to maybe ping stuff, look around, move around. You could fit that onto a console controller and still probably play the game, perfectly fine, and it would work perfectly fine, right? So would it make sense for Riot to release it on console here, Valorant? Yeah, in my opinion, yes. Obviously, a lot of other extra people would be coming into the game. That's good for Riot. It probably would be good for the game as well, right? It'd probably bring like an extra layer of hype to the game as well, right? People would be like, oh yeah, Valorant's coming to console. Let's see it. Let's try it out again, right? So that would probably be good as well, even if it is, as I say, in the distant future. Would crossplay be enabled? That is obviously a big thing that would, kind of first comes to mind whenever you get a game like this releasing on console. And obviously the answer is we don't know at this point. But let's assume that it did, right? And some of the problems that can come with crossplay. One problem, I think, from the console side, when you're a console player playing with PC players for a lot of these games, is that PC players could be cheating. And, that can obviously ruin your experience. I know I've experienced that in other games myself. So that can be a problem. But in Valorant, actually, there isn't that many cheaters, or at least I definitely haven't run into that many cheaters. I know most people kind of say the same thing, that, maybe once, maybe twice, but really, it's not too common overall to run into people who are actually cheating in the game. So that's good. And that probably wouldn't be too big of a problem. So from the console player's side, that seems good. Obviously, from the PC player's side, one big problem tends to be aim assist for, controller players. And that obviously can be a bit of an issue, because if there is aim assist, getting the balance just right is quite difficult with that, where it can just make the game easier to play on either PC or console, depending on, how the aim assist is actually working. So, well, we'd have to see. Obviously, we don't know if aim assist would even be in Valorant on console. I don't know. But that could be, a potential challenge for the devs here if they are going to add it in and crossplay was enabled as well. But overall, I think that this is a good thing, that, this would probably bring in quite a few more players to Valorant overall if you added the console players in there. So overall, I think it's a positive. Would obviously have to see the specifics of how exactly it would work. But in my mind, I'm pretty positive on this whole situation. The next thing to talk about is that Valorant released a podcast called the Off Patch podcast here, where, it's going to be 2 of the devs working on the game, Jeff Lander and the lead agent designer, Jay Watford, basically talking about Valorant patch 5.10. And I will leave a link in the description to watch the whole thing, but we're just going to take a couple little few of the clips here and just kind of talk about what they were talking about in that episode. So let's start off, and first of all, they're going to be talking about the changes to Cypher's tripwires.
Hopefully this gives Cypher enough to actually engage in that. So it's not just like Cypher has to put his trapwire there. It's he can have it in these different spots. Which one is he going to do this time, and what do we have to do to play against it?
So yeah, the idea basically behind the change is that, Cypher setups won't always be the same, and just to allow Cypher that kind of flexibility to make your opponents think about what they are doing. Okay, the next one I think is really, really interesting, and that is the comparison to Chamber, and how people were kind of down on the Cypher stuff, saying that, well, he's still not better than Chamber, and so, why does this buff even matter?
It's always a bummer to see, players feel like, oh, like I'm really excited about these Cypher changes, but it doesn't change anything because Chamber's still here, and wanting more for Cypher because of that. I think that the danger that we get in is if we buffed Cypher to the point that he could compete with Chamber right now, the second that we got Chamber in the place we wanted, we'd have a Cypher problem.
So yeah, this is something that I mentioned myself, that a lot of people, basically down on these cipher changes because Chamber still existed. But as I said, and as the dev said just there, if they did buff Cypher and then nerf Chamber, then you've just got, Cypher who's way too good as well. So, this is more of a long-term change. And of course, when you're a game dev, you kind of have to think more long-term. Obviously, they know the changes that are going to be coming to Chamber as well. So, they've kind of got this bigger picture than we do right now of just this Cypher change. The next thing we're just going to touch on is something that I think a lot of people, maybe not so much watching this channel, but particularly, the wider Valorant audience might be, a bit concerned about in how the devs are thinking about it. But let's just listen to what the devs have to say.
We do want to iterate faster. I think a lot of stars align with Harbor, and that, oftentimes we have esports going on, and that's a really big consideration for us.
So they were talking there, obviously, about the harbor change and basically how, this harbor change came about quite quickly, right? The agent just released and then pretty much straight away got a buff, which I think, was a good thing, and it wasn't in the PBE and all of that. And one thing that they obviously mentioned there was they have esports considerations. And this is something that I think, again, maybe not so much on this channel, people, like esports, I think, on this channel, most of you probably. But for the wider Valorant audience, I think a lot of people get this wrong, that, oh, why would they balance around such a small percentage of the player base, right? There's only a 0.001 probably percent of the player base are pro players who are getting paid to play. So why would you, kind of balance the game around, such a small player base, essentially, right? When there's so many more players that you can, basically, balance for and get iterations done quicker. And they did mention that, they want to be iterating more and doing it faster anyway, that is kind of one of their goals. And, this harbor buff is kind of an example of that, but they are going to balance around esports, right? And they have kind of found this nice little time where, it's the off season, so they can perhaps get more, creative and go, kind of bigger with these changes now that it is the off season. And, things aren't as crucial to get right all of the time for that esports player base. But the thing is, these pro players are likely to be the players that, find ways of breaking the game, right? Those are the players who are going to be pushing this game to the limit, essentially. So if the game isn't balanced for those players who are pushing it to the limit, and if they find some, cracks in the game, essentially, if they start breaking the game, then that will slowly funnel down to everyone starts breaking the game. So you kind of do need to, I think it makes the most sense to take this top-down approach, so that if the top players in the world, can't find a way of, breaking some mechanic or, abusing some agent in some way, that probably means that the rest of the game of the community probably won't be able to either, right? And that is kind of an important point, and why, they're gonna balance from a top-down approach and focus on those top players and how they're using the agents, because, if they can't find any problems with it, well, then it's unlikely that your bronze player is going to either. Another thing that they mentioned later on as well is to do with this harbor change, and how this harbor change was very simple, from just a simple point of they changed the cascade number from 1 to 2. That is a very simple thing to do, right? The coding wise, it's very simple, right? Like, in terms of, there's nothing like art style they had to change. They were talking about how the cipher changes, they had to change all this yellow silhouette, and they had to get, the art stuff work for that, right? And that took time, and there's more going into that than there is to just change one of Harbor's abilities to change a number from 1 to 2. That is very, very simple to do, and it's, unlikely to break the code of the rest of the game, and it's not probably going to have any major bugs come with it either, right? So that's a very simple change to make. And they reference this in terms of Chamber as well, right? That for Chamber's change, it's maybe a bit more of a bigger change. And so, there is things there that, are going to take more time. They need more resources, right? Maybe it requires, some kind of art update, or it requires some kind of, major coding update to how Chamber is working, right? If they're going for more of a redesign rather than, just a simple change like this, that is going to take generally more work anyway than it is, to actually change Harbor from a cascade from 1 to 2. And these are the kind of things that we as players, I think, don't really think about, when we are, discussing agent changes and how they need to change these agents, and why, Chamber wasn't in this patch. So yeah, go and check out the Valorant off patch So yeah, go and check out the Valorant Off Patch podcast. We'll leave a link in the description for you if you want to take a look at it, because there's a ton in there that I didn't mention as well. And I don't know how often they will do these. Probably every time a significant patch comes out, I would guess. But yeah, I think it's going to be pretty interesting. If you're interested in game design, if you're interested in how the Valorant devs are thinking about the game, go and give it a listen because it was quite informative, I think, overall. And then the final thing I just want to quickly touch on as well is to do with some game changers stuff, where they released this little article here about the changing format, at least for EMEA 2023. Don't know what the other regions are doing just yet, but essentially, the main thing I think from this is that there's going to be a 16-team league for game changers. For those kind of top 16 teams, they are going to play in a league format instead, which I think is going to be really, really interesting. It's going to be more split up like it is, on the other side of Valorant, where there's kind of this primary league and then kind of a contenders below that, right? Similar to kind of the tier 2 stuff in Ascension as well. This, I think, is only positive. It sounds like a good idea, at least in my mind, where these 16th, a league system to me, right? Everyone's playing against each other at least once is kind of how I think it will work. That means you're going to get regular game for these game changers players. It gives you perhaps like more clear pathway as well, as a game changers player to, go into like a contenders team and then, manage to work your way up into, one of these top 16 teams. And then maybe even if you're dominating at that level in these top 16 teams, obviously the main goal of game changers is, for game changers to not need to exist eventually. That's kind of the goal of it. But if you are dominating in game changers, maybe you do get a shot at, either an Ascension team or, even a tier 1 team, perhaps, if you really are, popping off. So, that I think is a good thing, right? It gives these players more chance to kind of showcase what they're on. It's a more structured format. I think it's just a good change overall. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to see how this works next year. So that is just some Valorant news, essentially. We got quite a bit of news from yesterday. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a comment about any of this, to be honest, because there's quite a few different things to talk about there. So yeah, leave a comment down in the comment section below for what you think, and I will see you next time.